Washington's 20-year war in Afghanistan is ending. But what is the U.S. leaving behind? President Joe Biden pointed to the financial costs when he decided to end America's longest war.
$1 trillion spent training and equipping hundreds of thousands of Afghan national security and defense forces. 2,448 Americans killed. 20,722 more wounded. And untold thousands coming home with unseen trauma to their mental health.
But missing from his statements was any mention of the price paid by the Afghan people. And Afghanistan has paid a very steep price. Brown University's Costs of War study found that the U.S. invasion and ensuing war has killed more than 47,000 Afghan civilians since it began in 2001.
حکومت د خواطنه هغه منطقه وشتل کیږي د امریکایانو د خواطنه هغه منطقه سایه بمبار کیږي نو اته چې زما خپل کور پکې وجاړ شو وران شو مور مې د لاسه ورکړله لور مې د لاسه پکې ورکړله کور مې اوس هم همداسې وجاړ پروت دی.
Hundreds of thousands more people have died from war-related hunger, disease, and injuries. And more than 3.5 million have been displaced internally or forced to flee to Pakistan, Iran, and elsewhere to escape the fighting.
A failure to reach a peace agreement in Afghanistan and stem the current violence will lead to further displacement within the country as well to the neighboring countries and beyond.
But when the U.S. announced it was time to withdraw, it didn't plan to stick around long enough for all parties to reach a consensus. Former U.S. President Trump wanted out, and in 2020, his administration went around the internationally recognized Afghan government to negotiate with the Taliban. And in February, Trump signed a deal to withdraw in return for promises from the Taliban that it would denounce al-Qaeda and prevent Afghanistan from being used to stage attacks on America. But a few months later, the UN warned that the Taliban had also promised al-Qaeda they'd remain allies and continue to fight and train together. In April, when Biden followed through on Trump's deal and announced the total withdrawal of combat forces, he said the U.S. had reached its stated goal.
We went to Afghanistan in 2001 to root out al-Qaeda, to prevent future terrorist attacks against the United States planned from Afghanistan.
But the U.S. strategy to prevent such attacks also included goals meant to help the war-torn nation get back on its feet, like rebuilding infrastructure, state institutions, and ending drug production. And its failure to meet them often led to even more suffering for Afghanistan.
نتونستن که وعده خود بر مردم افغانستان عملی کنن. فعلا اگر باشم اینا کنم مفاد بر مردم افغانستان رسانده نمیتونه به خاطر از اینکه طالق بدن هیچ کنم دگرگونی و تغییرات بر وضع امنیتی افغانستان و مردم افغانستان اینا ناوردن. اگر دی به بعدشون باشه یعنی چی؟ معنیش چی؟
President Biden has defended America's exit.
We did not go to Afghanistan to nation build. And it's the right and the responsibility of the Afghan people alone to decide their future and how they want to run their country.
But there's some evidence to the contrary. From 2002 to 2008, the second phase of the U.S. mission had two goals: defeating the Taliban and reconstruction. Washington even created an office to serve as a watchdog on its billions in spending there. The Office of U.S. Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, or SIGAR, and it spent more than $143 billion on reconstruction programs. SIGAR's John Sopko considered them failures as far back as 2014.
To me, it's billions of dollars that probably have been wasted. We've built schools that are falling down. We've built clinics that there are no doctors for. We've built roads that are falling apart.
A report from Sopko's office confirmed that more than $6 billion was wasted on cars and buildings that were never maintained. It also found that pumping so much money into the Afghan economy fueled corruption, enriching abusive government officials, warlords, drug lords, and militias, eroding public trust.
I think the problem was that people were well aware that corruption was a problem.
Most Afghans have yet to see the benefits of those billions of dollars. Estimates on those living below the poverty line vary from around 55 to 90%. The pandemic hasn't helped, but analysts point to an even bigger problem.
Afghans were not really much affected by the pandemic. There was no actual lockdown. Businesses went as usual. What has, however, hit the country hard is the dwindling international support to the economy. With the withdrawal of foreign forces, more international support has been lost, and this results in unemployment and cuts the flow of money.
With few available jobs, some have turned to the drug trade to survive. Afghanistan is the source of 85% of the world's opium poppies. The U.S. has spent more than $9 billion trying to lower poppy cultivation and drug production. But those efforts have failed. Opium production increased rapidly during the pandemic, growing alongside a boom in production of crystal meth. And exposure to the drugs has fueled an epidemic of addiction.
بجای از برن درس‌های دینی بخوانن در مکتب خدا بذار برن سال باشن در سرحد بشینن مرگ یک مرگ است.
With widespread poverty, the drug trade has become the only way some can support their families.
موږ پوهیږو چې دغه زرناک بوټي دي خو به د مجبوریت نه دغه نه بیروزګارۍ نه دغه موږ کړو دي نه موږ بیا د ژوند هغه کوم مشکلاتونه چې دي هغه موږ رافع کوو نور داسې خاص کار روزګار نشته د دې خاطر موږ دا کار کوو.
Opium smuggling can reportedly pay more than $300 for a single run. But those that try risk being shot by police or military in neighboring countries. In Iran, they also risk arrest and execution. Despite the dangers of trafficking, the profits are an important source of income for the Taliban. About 20 years ago, the U.S. toppled Afghanistan's Taliban government, but with Washington's withdrawal, it's now fighting to take back power. And some political analysts say when the U.S. went to the Taliban with a peace deal, it gave the militant group a sheen of political legitimacy. The U.S. signed a deal with the Taliban, knowing many Afghans fear its harsh, often violent rule.
و من حیث یک شهروند افغان و من حیث یک دختر افغانی که فعلا حداقل در زمانی که حکومت قدرت را داره حکومت رسمی قدرت داره میتونم راحت درس بخوانم میتونم راحت در جامعه کار بکنم اگه یه اتفاق بیفته و نیروهای آمریکایی خارج شوند جنگ داخلی شود یا که حداقل حکومت به شکل به دست طالبان بیفته فکر میکنم که این چانس نخواهد داشتم حتی شاید نتونم که از خانه بیرون شوم یا اینکه راحت درس بخوانم یا اینکه بتونم در اجتماع فعالیت کنم.
If you look at the number of scholars, athletes, scientific advancements, you've got girl coding clubs, you've got girl robotics teams, you've got women climbing to the highest peaks in Afghanistan. Like, the doors have been thrown open in the last 20 years for Afghans to do what they couldn't do. As for the Afghan military, the Costs of War report estimates more than 66,000 Afghan soldiers and police were killed during the war. Officials warn that the U.S. withdrawal has left their military without air support to supply food and ammunition to the front lines. And without U.S.-funded contractors, it'll have to scramble to maintain its fleet, communications equipment, fuel supplies, salary payments, and more. But despite the adjustments the Afghan military has to make in order to fight the Taliban without the U.S., it's hard to put a thumb on who's winning.
It's hard to say. It's hard to get accurate reporting from the battlefield. The Afghan National Army is putting up a robust defense, and for all we know, the government forces could be winning on the battlefield, even if it appears that they are losing the war over narrative in the media.
Deputy Director of the Wilson Center think tank's Asia program, Michael Kugelman, tweeted a warning that some reports use maps of Taliban-controlled areas that contradict each other. The Taliban has about 80,000 full-time fighters, and the Afghan military has roughly 260,000 soldiers and aircrew, plus civilian volunteers. As the security situation worsens, with no clear victor in the struggle between the Taliban and the government, the price many Afghans are paying remains unheard and unseen.